The man behind the walk-in freezer had been there for 11 minutes before I noticed him. I know the exact number, because I had checked the time at 8:49 when I went to pull the dessert mise en place, the little ramekins of crème brûlée that chefs set up at the start of every Friday service, lined in rows like white soldiers, 4 per table plus 2 reserves. And I checked it again at 9:00 when I came back for the lemon garnish I had forgotten, and in that 11-minute window the air in the corner of the kitchen behind the cold storage had changed. Not a sound. Not a shadow. A temperature differential. A pocket of cold that was 3 degrees wrong for where it was positioned because the walk-in door was closed and had been closed all service, and a pocket of cold that size and that shape does not exist in a working kitchen unless something, or someone, was recently pressed against a wall and is currently still there. I had been out of the army for 4 years. The body remembers what the mind prefers to forget. My eyes moved, not fast. Fast draws attention, and attention was the last thing I needed in a kitchen with 18 people in it, who were all looking at their own stations and their own timers and their own weeds. I moved them the way I'd been taught to move them at Fort Bragg, in the counter-surveillance course that my sergeant called the class for people who want to come home. Slow, systematic, left edge to right, high to low, cataloging without committing. He was in the 18 inches between the freezer and the external wall, standing completely still, one hand at his side, the other holding something I couldn't fully see from my angle, but the outline of it had a weight and a shape that my body identified before my conscious mind caught up. He was looking at the service window. Through the service window, 40 feet away in the main dining room of Hanam, the restaurant that the Tribune called a temple of Korean fine dining in the heart of the Gold Coast, and that I called my 3rd job in 2 years, and the first one that paid enough to keep my sister's lights on. Through that window, in the booth with the black lacquer screen and the standing reservation that the floor manager had told me, twice, belonged to someone we do not approach without being called, sat Shin Kong Day. He was here every 3rd Friday. I had served him twice. He drank 1 glass of Barolo. Exactly 1. And he ate whatever the chefs sent out, and he spoke to the man on his left and the man on his right in a voice I could not hear from the floor. And the rest of the restaurant did not look at him the way the rest of the restaurant looked at other wealthy men. It looked away, carefully, deliberately, the practiced avoidance of people who know that a certain kind of power does not want to be seen. The man behind the freezer was watching the back of his head. I had 11 minutes before the next dessert course. 11 minutes, a kitchen full of people who were not looking, and a decision that was either the smartest or the last one I would ever make. I picked up my garnish tray. I did not look at him again. I went back to the floor. World Build Hanam did not advertise itself. There was no sign above the entrance. Just a number in brushed brass on a matte black door on a street that most people drove past without noticing. In a block of the Gold Coast that had been sold and resold 4 times in 6 years and currently belonged to a hospitality group whose parent company's name appeared twice in the Tribune's business section without explanation. The restaurant held 42 covers. The wait list ran 3 weeks on the short end. The prefix menu changed monthly and never appeared on any food website, because the kind of people who ate at Hanam were not looking for Hanam on a food website. They arrived by car, always by car, and the cars were the kind that came with drivers. I had been working the floor here for 5 months, since a college friend who was the sous chef had texted me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Front of house position opened up. 2 years, no questions asked. Cash plus card? Interested? And I had said yes before I finished reading it, because my bank account had $47 in it, and my sister's rent was due, and the army had taken 4 years of my life and given me back something harder and quieter and significantly less employable than what it had taken. The floor manager's name was Jin, and he had hired me in 7 minutes, which I had understood was not a comment on my qualifications. It was a comment on the fact that Hanem needed people who were good at being present without being seen. People who refilled glasses and cleared plates and moved through the dining room like water, frictionless, invisible, capable of going unnoticed in a room full of people who were accustomed to being noticed themselves. I was good at that. I had been trained to be good at that for reasons that had nothing to do with hospitality. The dining room was the color of a controlled fire, amber and deep red, and a darkness at the edges that was specific and intentional. The kind of darkness that says what happens here stays here without saying anything at all. The tables were black lacquer, and the linens were silk, and the music was something low and instrumental that I had never been able to identify, but that sat in the chest like a slow exhale. The booths along the east wall were deeper than the tables, with screens that could be drawn for privacy, and those booths had a separate order protocol and a separate closing ritual, and Jin had explained them to me on my first shift in language that was very precise about what I should do, and said nothing at all about why. I had served Shinkang Day twice. The first time, I had come to the table because his water glass was empty, and I refilled it, and he did not look at me, and I had gone back to the floor. Standard, the second time, he had been watching something on the far side of the room when I approached, and his eyes had moved, quickly, involuntarily, the fast scan of a man whose reflexes were built for threat assessment, and they had landed on me, and he had held the contact for exactly 2 seconds before looking away. Not dismissal. Assessment, the eyes of a man who reads everyone who gets close to him and makes a determination and files it. I had filed him too. Former military, or close enough that the posture was structural. Controlled in a way that was trained and old. 36, maybe 37. Something in the jaw and the way he held his shoulders said he had been carrying something for a long time and had stopped noticing the weight. The men on either side of him were security, which I identified not from their builds, but from the way they positioned themselves in the booth, angles of the body, eyes tracking the room, slight asymmetry of posture that indicated hardware under the left arm. The tattoo on the back of his right hand, a single crane, black ink, flight feathers spread, caught the candlelight every time he lifted his wine glass. I had been careful not to look at it. I had been careful, specifically, not to look at anything about Shinkangdea that I did not need to look at in order to do my job, because the discipline I had been taught and the discipline I had earned said that noticing things was fine, and looking like you were noticing things was a completely different and significantly more dangerous activity. In the kitchen, behind the walk-in freezer, was a man with a weapon pointed at the back of his head. And I was the only person in this building who knew. Inciting collision. The witness I finished the dessert course. I cleared the amuse-bouche from table 6. I ran a breadbasket to the couple by the window, who had been waiting long enough to start looking at each other instead of the room, which was a bad sign for the evening and a worse sign for my tip. At 9:07, I went back to the kitchen for the wine decanter that needed to be returned to the sommelier station, and I went past the walk-in, and the cold pocket was still there. He had been holding that position for 18 minutes. That was patience of a specific kind. The kind that is not willpower, it is training. The kind that is not waiting, it is positioning. I knew that kind of patience, because I had been required to demonstrate it in a jungle in a country I was not technically in, for a purpose that was not technically sanctioned, for a government that would not technically acknowledge I had been there. The difference between that man and me was the target. I set the decanter down on the sommelier counter. I picked up a clean side towel. I walked to the pass-through, which was the long stainless steel ledge where the kitchen and the floor met, and I stood at the far end of it, the end closest to the walk-in, and I began polishing the water glasses that lived in the rack above the pass. Standard end-of-service task. Invisible, and I said, quietly, into the middle distance. Without looking at him, he rotates his security at 9:15. A pause, very slight. The quality of air that exists between a man who has just heard something he was not expecting and the moment before he decides what to do about it. 8 minutes, I said. When the left side of the booth clears, his right side is exposed for 45 seconds. If that's your window, it's been running for 7 minutes already. Another pause. Then walk away. 2 words. Low. Male. Accented in the specific way of someone who learned formal English before casual English, the grammar precise and the register slightly wrong for the setting. I kept polishing. I'm not stopping you, I said. I'm telling you the window closed 3 minutes ago. The rotation happened early tonight. Both men are on the floor. Nothing. You've missed it, I said. For tonight. A very long pause. Then the sound. Barely a sound, really. More an absence of sound shifting. Of a man who had been holding himself against a wall, releasing the held breath of someone who had been waiting for their moment to arrive. He stepped out from behind the freezer. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the glass I was polishing, and I kept my breathing even, and I applied everything I had about not performing calm. You don't perform calm. You locate it. You find the place in your chest where the training lives, and you stand on it. He was directly behind me. I could feel him the way you feel a weather system, a change in the pressure of the room. You work here, he said. Yes, you saw me. Yes, why are you still talking? I set the glass down. I picked up the next one. Because if I were going to say something, I would have said it 8 minutes ago at the top of the service, when I could have cleared the kitchen in under 30 seconds and had 3 people between me and you before you could decide what to do about it. I paused. I didn't. The silence behind me had a different quality now. The threat quality had shifted into something else, something that was processing rather than calculating. The difference between a weapon being aimed and a weapon being reconsidered. Why, he said. That's a longer conversation. We're not having a longer conversation. Not tonight, I said. I put the glass in the rack. I picked up the decanter. I turned around and looked at him for the first time with my full attention, the way I had been carefully not looking at him for 5 months. And I understood in the space of 2 seconds everything I had been working not to understand. Up close, Shin Kong Dae was the kind of still that other people arrange themselves around, like furniture in a room that has one piece that can't be moved. His eyes were fixed on me with an attention that was pure and total and slightly alarming. The attention of a man for whom very few things were genuinely unexpected, and who was in the presence, currently, of one of them. The crane tattoo was a foot from my face. Up close, the feathers had detail I couldn't have seen from the floor, each one rendered with the patience of something meant to be permanent. I'm on the floor for another 90 minutes, I said. After that, I'm someone who saw nothing. His eyes stayed on mine. I watched the calculation move through them, fast, meticulous. The way a man calculates who has done it professionally and for a long time. What's your name? He said. Doesn't matter tonight. It will matter. I looked at him steadily. Cadence Webb, I said. Table 7 is waiting. I walked back to the floor. Behind me, the kitchen sounds resumed, the clatter and the heat and the controlled chaos of 18 people finishing a service, and I did not look back. and I did not know whether he was still in that kitchen or had already disappeared into the alley behind the building, or was watching me cross the dining room with the crane tattoo, catching candlelight, and a decision made that I would not know about until later. I got to table 7 and smiled at the couple who had been waiting for their bread, and I set the basket down and told them the next course would be out in 4 minutes, and I walked back to the pass, and I did not allow my hands to shake. CTA Bridge, welcome back, my quiet storm watchers and slow burn faithful. If you found this story tonight and you are new here, stay subscribed before we go any further, because this story moves fast and you don't want to miss a single step. Hit the like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from right now. Every comment stretches this family a little further across the map, and I love seeing every city, every time zone, every name. Find your spot. Turn the lights down. Because Cadence just made the most dangerous decision of her life, and she hasn't even gotten to the hard part yet. Story deepen. Heroine's wound. I had been 23 when I enlisted. I had been good at it. Genuinely good. The kind of good that gets noticed and redirected and eventually ends up in rooms with no windows where the things being discussed are not on any record that will ever be declassified. My commanding officer, a woman from Georgia who had a laugh like a thunderstorm and eyes that never laughed, had told me once that I had the specific gift of being underestimated in ways that were structurally useful. I was black, and I was a woman, and I was 23, and I was the last person anyone in a room thought to watch for the thing I was there to do. She called it a gift. I had spent enough years with it by then to understand it as a tax. I left the Army at 27. For reasons that were partly mine and partly the Army's, and the discharge was honorable, and the record was clean. And there was a whole layer underneath both of those things that was neither honorable nor clean, and that I had spent 4 years trying to fold small enough to live with. I had come back to Chicago because my sister Renee was here. Because Chicago was home in the way that places are home when they're the thing you compare everything else to, and because my mother had died while I was on a second tour I couldn't talk about, and I had not been there. And being in Chicago felt like the smallest possible version of making that right. I had worked 3 jobs in 4 years. Security consultant, briefly for a firm that found out quickly they had not hired someone who would tell them what they wanted to hear. Paralegal assistant, for 11 months, at a downtown firm where my supervising attorney said I had the best instincts he'd ever seen in someone without a law degree, and then fired me when I flagged an irregularity in a client file that turned out to be an irregularity he already knew about. And now this, the floor of Hanam, the black apron, the careful invisibility of a woman in a uniform moving through rooms where the real business was happening just below the level of what could be formally acknowledged. My sister Renee thought I was wasting myself. She said this the way she said most things, directly, without softening, with the particular bluntness of a woman who had watched her younger sister come back from somewhere she couldn't talk about and become someone quieter and harder and more careful than the girl who left. You could do anything, Renee said, every time she said it. You could go back to school. You could get a real job. You could stop hiding. I was not hiding. I was calculating. There is a difference between hiding and choosing when to move. My sergeant had taught me that. In a classroom at Fort Bragg, with a topographical map on the wall and 22 of us sitting in folding chairs learning the taxonomy of patience, hiding is passive. Positioning is active. You are never hiding. You are always somewhere for a reason. I had been at Hanam for 5 months for a reason I was still working out. And now the reason had walked into my kitchen with a weapon and a window and had walked back out again because I had told him the window was closed. I did not know yet what I had put in motion. I knew that I had moved. I knew it was not hiding. And I knew that the man with the crane tattoo would not forget my name. Would not forget me, in the way that I would not have forgotten if our positions had been reversed. He had looked at me the way my CO used to look at situations that needed to be understood before they could be used. Story deepen. Hero's wound. I found out 6 days later why someone wanted him dead. Not from him, from a man named Dae-soo, who came into the restaurant on a Tuesday night, alone, and asked for the table in the back corner and ordered soup, and nursed it for 2 hours while looking at nothing. And who was? I understood from the specific tension in the line of his shoulders and the way he checked the entrance every 4 minutes. Not dining. He was waiting to be found. I had seen Dae-soo before, at the edge of Shin Kung-dae's table on 2 occasions, not a security guard, not in the booth, but nearby, the way a man is nearby when his role is adjacent and peripheral and specific in a way that has a job title no one uses in polite company. He was younger than I expected for someone in that position. Late 20s, the kind of tired that accumulates over years, not nights. When I brought his second water, he said, in Korean, which I spoke at a level I had never disclosed to anyone at Hanam, "He knows you work here." I set the water down. I straightened the napkin. "Who does?" "You know who." I sat down across from him, which was not something a floor waitress at Hanam did with a solo diner, and which I did without asking, because the time for performing only a waitress had passed on Friday, and we both knew it. "Talk," I said. Dae-soo looked at the entrance, looked at me. The attempt on Friday was the third. The first 2 were 6 months ago, in the parking structure and then in his apartment building. Both were stopped. Both were. The people involved are no longer a concern. He paused on that phrase the way you pause on language that has been selected carefully. The third was different. Someone who is close. Someone who knows his schedule, his rotation, his table preference. Inside, I said. Inside, I thought about Friday. About the rotation that had gone early, not random, not a fluke. Adjusted deliberately, probably from a phone call. Probably from someone on this floor who knew the schedule had been changed and had passed it to someone waiting in an alley. But it had been adjusted to close the window, not open it, which meant whoever was protecting him from the inside had done the adjustment, not the threat. 2 insides, working against each other. The man behind the freezer had been sent by one. "He wants to know," Dae-soo said, "how you knew the window had closed." "I pay attention," I said. "He's aware." A pause. "He wants to know why you told the man behind the freezer instead of security." This was the question I had been sitting with for 6 days. I had an answer. I had several answers. And I had sorted through them the way I used to sort through intelligence reports, looking for the one that was true rather than the one that was convenient. "Because security has a leak," I said. "Someone on the inside is feeding the schedule. If I bring the threat to security, I'm bringing it to the leak. And then I'm not just a waitress who saw something she shouldn't have. I'm a problem that needs to be solved." Dae-soo was quiet for a moment. "He said you would say that," he said. "He said if you said that, I should give you this." He set something on the table. A card. Plain. White, 1 phone number. I looked at it. "I'm not working for him." "He's not asking you to work for him." A pause. "He's asking you to have dinner." Forced proximity. The competence ladder the restaurant he chose was not Hanam. It was a Korean barbecue place in a strip mall in Wicker Park, with plastic menus and a ventilation system that worked at 50% and the best galbi in the city, which I knew because I had been coming here since I was 19, and my friend Daniel's mother had fed me at this table after my mother's funeral because I had not been able to eat anything that required silverware without dropping it. Shin Kong-dae was already there when I arrived. No security in the room. His jacket was off, the first time I had seen him without it, and the crane tattoo was visible on the back of his right hand, and there was a second tattoo I hadn't seen before. Characters running along his left forearm that I didn't read immediately, because reading them immediately would have told him things about me I wasn't ready to. He looked at me the way he had looked at me in the kitchen, like an equation he was still solving. "You're late," he said. "You're early," I said. "There's a difference." I sat down. I picked up the menu. I did not look at him. Rung one. He had ordered already, the standard spread, the kind of order a person places at a restaurant they know well and have eaten at enough times that the menu is a formality. I filed that. He came here. Not to the Gold Coast's minimalist temples of architecture, not to the restaurant that bore his city's name, but to a strip mall in Wicker Park with plastic menus and a ventilation problem. A place where he was not being watched. "You knew the rotation had been adjusted," he said. Yes, not everyone watching the room would have known that. Not everyone watching the room paid attention to the rotation for 5 months. A pause. "Why were you watching the rotation for 5 months?" "Habit," I said. "Or profession. Depending on what you want to call it. What did the army call it?" I set the menu down. I looked at him. He looked back, steady, unhurried. "Dae-soo told you," I said. "Dae-soo found your discharge record. It required access he should not have had." A pause. "I am choosing not to ask how he got it." "Smart," I said. "Your file says you were in logistics. My file says a lot of things. Your file also has 17 months that are filed under a clearance level I have been unable to pull," he said, "which, in my experience, does not happen for logistics." I said nothing. He poured tea into my cup. An action so unremarkably domestic in the context of everything that surrounded it that I felt the strangeness of it as a physical sensation. "I'm not asking what you did," he said. "I'm asking why you're here. I told you, I needed work. You needed work, and you chose a restaurant that has had 4 incidents in the last 14 months that were never reported to Chicago PD," he said. "That is not a coincidence. That is reconnaissance." I looked at the tea. "The galbi here is very good." Something crossed, not amusement exactly. He had the jaw of a man who had been not amused for so long that the infrastructure for amusement had been repurposed for other uses. But something in the vicinity. The anteroom of it. "You are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who wanted something from me." "I don't want anything from you," I said. "I wanted to not have a man killed in a kitchen I work in because it would have been very bad for business, and I like this job. That's the reason. That's one of them." He looked at me. "What are the others?" "Rung 2. I did not answer that. Not then. I changed the subject to the food, and he let me change it, which was its own kind of answer. A man who presses every point until it yields does not let points be changed. He was letting me set the pace. I noted that and filed it next to the restaurant and the menu order and the crane tattoo and the 17 other things I had been noting since the moment Dae-soo sat down in my section. We ate. The galbi was as good as it always. He ate with the efficiency of someone who does not have complicated feelings about food, fuel, pleasure, function, in that order. I ate the same way. We did not speak for several minutes, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which was information. Comfortable silence with a stranger is rare. Comfortable silence with a dangerous stranger is rarer. I sat in it. and I did not fill it. And he did not fill it, and we were two people who had apparently both spent enough time in situations where silence was the correct tactical choice that it had become a native language. 3 attempts, I said. Eventually, yes, escalating. The first was opportunistic. The second was planned. The third, he stopped. The third required information that should not exist outside my organization. Who knew about the table rotation? He was quiet for a moment. When someone does not immediately answer a question about the inside of their world, it is either because they are deciding how much to tell you, or because the answer is something they have not yet been able to say out loud. I had learned, from years of reading rooms and people in them, to hear the difference. This was the second kind. Someone I trusted, he said, for a long time. I looked at my tea. How long? 12 years. I said nothing. There is nothing to say to 12 years. There is only the silence of understanding exactly how deep that particular knife goes. Rung 3. I stayed late at the restaurant that night. Not because he asked me to. He did not ask me to stay, which was another thing I noted and filed. He paid the bill and he stood and put his jacket on and he said, "What I told you tonight does not leave this table," and I said, "I know how to keep information. That's also not logistics." And he looked at me for a long moment, and then he left. I stayed and finished my tea and I thought about what I had, which was the following. A man with a leak in his organization at the 12-year level, which meant the leak had existed through multiple operational cycles and multiple personnel changes, and had been feeding something or someone for a very long time. 3 attempts, escalating specificity. The third required real-time schedule information, which meant the leak had active communication, not just historical access. I pulled out my phone and I opened the Notes app and I started writing. Not for him. For me, because the habits of the 17 months that were filed under a clearance I would never have again are not habits you stop having when you take off the uniform. 2 weeks later, I had a map. It was not a complete map. It had gaps and assumptions marked clearly as such, and 3 threads I could not yet connect. But it had enough shape that when I photographed it on my phone and looked at it on the screen, I could see the structure underneath. The way an architecture is visible before the walls go up. Just the bones of it against the sky. I sent it to Dae-Soo's number. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. "Where did you get this?" said the voice. I recognized it. "Logic," I said. "And a lot of time thinking about your rotation schedule." A long pause. "This is not," he stopped. "You are not who you said you were." "I'm exactly who I said I was," I said. "I'm a waitress who pays attention. You keep acting like those two things can't coexist." Rung 4. The next evening, Dae-Soo appeared at my apartment building. Not at the door. At the entrance of my street, standing by a car, which was the version of asking that exists in the world Shin Kong-dae occupied. I put on my jacket and went down. "He wants to know everything," Dae-Soo said. "Everything is a lot." "He said you would say that." "He said to tell you." Dae-Soo paused, as if recalling the exact phrasing. "He said to tell you. I am not your CO. I am not asking. I am asking." I looked at the car. I looked at Dae-Soo. "There is a distinction," Dae-Soo said helpfully. I understood the distinction, I said. I got in the car. External threat, his name was Park Ji-hoon, and he had been Shin Kong-dae's head of external operations for 12 years. And he was currently building something that was not loyalty and not ambition, but a third thing that had been growing in the dark for long enough to have roots. I laid it out in sections, the way I had learned to brief intelligence: confirmed, probable, possible, unknown. I sat across a table from Shin Kong Dae in a room I did not know the address of, with Dae-soo beside me and two men I didn't recognize at the wall, and I went through my notes the same way I had gone through them alone in my apartment, methodically, without editorializing, letting the structure speak. Park had been the one to adjust the rotation on the night of the third attempt, not to protect, as it had initially appeared, but to test. To see whether the man behind the freezer, who was not operating independently, but was specifically hired, specifically placed, specifically positioned, would wait for the adjusted window or abandon the attempt. Park had wanted to know whether his asset was patient enough for the next phase. The next phase was not the restaurant. The next phase was the annual assembly, the gathering of 8 men who represented the organizational structure that sustained everything Shin Kong Dae's name was attached to. Once a year, in a location that changed but followed a pattern I had identified by cross-referencing 3 years of Dae-soo's calendar entries against 2 hospitality companies whose ownership traces to the same holding structure. Same city, rotating district, always a building with 2 exits, and a private dining room that can be secured from the inside. 14 Park had been planning this for 8 months. The 3 attempts before the assembly were not escalating efforts to kill Shin Kong Dae. They were dress rehearsals, each one testing a different variable, perimeter, schedule, proximity. The assembly was the performance. The room was very quiet when I finished. Shin Kong Dae had not moved. He had sat with his hands flat on the table the whole time I talked, not restless, not reactive, and he was still sitting that way, and the quality of his stillness was the one I had named on the first night as structural. Bone deep. The stillness of a man who had been betrayed by someone he loved for 12 years and was currently processing the geometry of it. "You have evidence," he said. "I have the kind of evidence that can be acted on," I said. "Not the kind that survives a courtroom. But you're not going to a courtroom." He looked at me. The equation still running. "No," he said. "The assembly cannot happen in that location," I said. "You need an alternative venue with no connection to any property in Park's access history, and you need to change it inside of 72 hours, which is the window before he finalizes his operational logistics. You know this because I know how operations like this are staged," I said. "And because I spent 3 nights reverse engineering his timeline from the information I had. It's the only schedule that fits." Dae-soo said something in Korean. Shin Kong Dae answered him without looking away from me. He asks. Dae-soo translated, though I had understood every word, "Why you are doing this." I thought about Renee's lights, about the $47 in my bank account on the night I said yes to this job, about the 3 jobs in 4 years, and the paralegal firm, and the security consultancy, and the 17 months under a classification level that had cost me things I was still counting. I thought about my CO and her eyes that never laughed, and the things she said about useful, and the tax that came with it. Because the man who wants to kill you is the same kind of man who decides that certain people and certain problems are acceptable losses, I said. I've worked for men like that. I've cleaned up after men like that. I'm done doing that. I looked at him. You're not that kind of man. I've been watching for 5 months. You're something else. Shin Kong Dae looked at me for a long time. What am I? He said. I don't know yet, I said. But you let me change the subject at dinner. And you said I am asking. And you came to a strip mall barbecue restaurant in Wicker Park instead of somewhere you'd be watched. I paused. Those are data points. The room was quiet. 72 hours, he said. Yes, I said. He nodded. Once, the particular nod of a man confirming something that matters. Declaration he came to the restaurant on a Thursday night, not the private table, not the lacquer screen. A two-top on the floor. No reservation. The kind of table that meant he had walked in and waited like anyone else, which I understood from Jin's expression when I arrived for my shift, and he said, quietly, "Table 4. He asked for you." I crossed the floor and stood beside the table. He was looking at the menu he did not need. The crane tattoo was in candlelight again, and I had stopped some time in the past 2 weeks pretending I was not cataloging it. "The assembly is relocated," he said, without looking up. "Park was removed from operational access this morning." A pause. "The situation is contained." "Good," I said. He set the menu down. He looked at me. "He had 8 months of intelligence on my organization," he said. "The scope of it is still being assessed. It will take time." He looked at the table. "Some of what he built cannot be easily undone." I stood there. "I know." "2 of the 8 men at the assembly will not attend," he said. "They had been compromised for longer than Park. This is something I did not know." He paused. "I did not know because I trusted them. I trusted them the way you trust something that has always been there, without checking." I stopped checking. I understood then the full weight of what 12 years meant. Not one betrayal, a structure of betrayals, nested, layered, the whole thing built on a foundation that had been quietly hollowed out while he was looking at the walls. "Kong Dae," I said. The name without the title, which I had never used. He looked up at it. "That's not a failure of trust," I said. "That's what happens when you stop letting yourself be wrong, when you stop letting the people who could tell you something see you clearly enough to say it." "You saw me clearly," he said. "I had no reason not to." "You had every reason not to." He looked at me steadily. "You had a job to keep and a life to maintain, and a very clean reason to walk past the walk-in freezer and say nothing, and let whatever was going to happen happen." A pause. "You didn't." "No," I said. "I want to know why. Not the logistical why, not the threat assessment. The other one. The one I had not answered at the barbecue restaurant. The real answer." I looked at the crane on the back of his hand, at the candlelight moving across it. I thought about the shape of the word useful, and the tax, and the specific exhaustion of spending years being only what you can be used for, and never what you simply are. "Because you were about to die in a place I worked," I said, "and I am very tired of being the person who walked past something and said nothing. I did that once, for different reasons, in a different life. I decided I wouldn't do it again." He looked at me for a long time. "Cadence. Don't make it into something it's not," I said. "I'm making it into what it is," he said. "You walked into my world, and you mapped it, and you handed it back to me in 72 hours, and you didn't ask for anything. I've been running this organization for 11 years, and no one has ever done that." He paused. "No one has ever done that without wanting something from me." I stood with that for a moment. "I want the Galbi," I said, "and the Pagion." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I spoke to Jin," he said. "You're not working." I looked at the empty chair across from him. The candlelight, the restaurant doing its slow, amber-colored business around us, and the people at their tables not looking at this table the way they always did not look at this table, and the particular quality of this moment, which was either the beginning of something I did not yet have words for, or the most dangerous decision I had made yet in a life that had several strong contenders for that title. I sat down. He poured my tea, the same unremarkable domestic gesture as the barbecue restaurant, and the strangeness of it was the same. A man who ran a criminal organization and had survived 3 assassination attempts and had just dismantled a 12-year betrayal was pouring tea with the steadiness of someone who had decided, in the space of 11 days, that this was a thing he was now going to do. My CO used to say, I said, that the most dangerous position in any operation is the one where you stop caring about the outcome. He looked at me. I don't know when that happened, I said. For me, I don't know when I stopped caring about what happened to me. After I came back, I just stopped. I came home, and I worked, and I watched out for Renee, and I paid bills, and I didn't care particularly about any of it. I looked at the tea. I cared, on Friday, that you didn't get shot. I cared enough to talk to a man with a weapon in a kitchen I had no business being in. That was the first time I cared about something in. I stopped. How long, he said. I shook my head. Long enough. He was quiet for a moment. The crane breathed in the candlelight. I understand, he said, what it is to stop caring. I have been running toward something for so long that I forgot what it was I was running toward. The organization became the point. The continuation of it became the point, and the people in it, the people I was supposed to trust. He stopped. They saw me caring about the wrong things. And they used it, I said. Yes, we sat in that for a moment. Two people who had been running on forward momentum and very little else, sitting in an amber-lit restaurant with tea going cold between them, and the strangeness was not uncomfortable. I'm not a safe person to be near, he said. It was not a warning. It was a fact, offered with the same precision he gave to all facts, plainly, without editorializing. I know, I said. I'm not a normal person to be near. No, he said. You are not. The choice. I finished the tea. I looked at the restaurant doing its thing around us. The amber and the low music, and the tables with their careful secrets, and the staff moving through it all like water. And I thought about Renee saying you could do anything, and my CO saying you're always somewhere for a reason, and the 17 months under a classification that had cost me things I was still counting. And I thought about the cold pocket behind the wok in freezer, and the 11 minutes, and the decision I had made without deciding, the way the body moves before the mind catches up. I had been positioning myself for 5 months. I had understood that, somewhere below the level of conscious planning, since the moment Jin hired me in 7 minutes and I took the job because of $47 and my sister's rent, and a third thing I had not looked at directly. I had been sitting in the room where the thing I could do was being done. The reading of exits and threats and people, the specific competence that the Army had paid me to develop, and that the civilian world had no clean language for, and I had been waiting to find out whether there was a reason for it. There was a reason. He was sitting across from me with a cold cup of tea and a crane tattoo and 11 years of running toward the wrong things, and the map I had built in 2 weeks was the first intelligence I had produced in 4 years that mattered to me, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. I want to finish the map, I said. He looked at me. The map. The full exposure. What Park accessed. Who he accessed it to. The secondary networks. It's not done. You have the immediate threat contained, but the architecture is still there. Someone will rebuild in it. I looked at him. I want to finish it. Why, he said. Not the logic. The reason. I thought about what was true. Because I'm good at it, I said, and I'm tired of not using it for something that matters. I paused. And because you said I am asking, and that was the right thing to say. He held my eyes for a long moment. You understand what that means, he said. Finishing it. What it puts you in the middle of. I have 17 months of classified experience that says I can manage the middle of things, I said. This is not a classified operation. No, I said. It's more dangerous than that. I looked at the crane. I'm not asking to be safe. I'm asking to be useful in a way that I choose. A long pause. He looked at the table. He looked back up. Dae-soo will contact you in the morning, he said. I know. This is not. He stopped. Something moved in his jaw. You are not obligated, Kang-dae. He looked at me. I sat down, I said. That's my answer. He was still for a moment. Then he reached across the table and set his hand beside mine. Not on it, beside it. Close enough that the crane tattoo was next to my hand, and the warmth of him was in the air between us, and the candlelight moved across both of us, and the restaurant went on with its quiet business, and neither of us said anything for a while. Some decisions do not need words. They need the body to stop running and sit down. I sat down. Emotional resolution, I told Renee on Sunday. Not everything. The version I told her was the one that was true in the ways that mattered and incomplete in the ways that were necessary. And she sat on her couch with her feet tucked under her, and she listened with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 4 years watching her sister come home from somewhere she couldn't talk about, and learning to hear what was not being said. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Is this the first time, she said, that you've been scared of something in a long time? I thought about that. Yes, good, she said. I looked at her. Good? You weren't scared before, she said. For years. That wasn't calm. That was something else. She looked at me. Scared means it matters. I've been waiting for something to matter to you again. I sat with that on the drive home, on the stairs up to my apartment. At my kitchen table with my notebook open and the map spread across it, the gaps still marked clearly as gaps, the unknown threads still trailing off into white space. I picked up my pen. I started working. The city outside my window was doing what cities do at midnight, carrying its traffic and its wind and its 10,000 separate lives forward into the next hour. Indifferent and enormous and full of things unfolding in rooms no one was watching. Somewhere in it, Shin Kang-dae was dealing with what 12 years of misdirected trust had built inside his world, dismantling it with the precision of a man who has always been thorough and who is now, finally, looking at the right things. I thought about the cold pocket behind the walk-in. The 11 minutes, the question I had asked myself every day since. Why did you say anything? I had the answer now. Because silence has its season, and its season was over. I wrote until 3 a.m. The map grew edges it had not had before. The gaps got smaller. Some of the unknown threads connected to things that were no longer unknown. It was not finished. It would not be finished for a long time, probably. Real work rarely finishes cleanly. It opens into the next necessary thing, and the next, and you follow it, because the alternative is to stop. I had stopped once. I was not going to do that again. End CTA. That's where we leave them tonight. My quiet storm watchers and slow burn faithful. Cadence with her notebook and her map and the thing that has finally started to matter. And Kang-dae with a crane tattoo and 12 years of wrong trust. And a woman sitting down at his table like she had already decided. If this story landed in your chest somewhere, you know what to do. Like it, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see every place this story traveled tonight. Our family is everywhere, and I love seeing every city come through. What happens when Cadence finishes the map? What happens when Park's network pushes back? Drop your theories below, because the next chapter is already written, and it does not slow down.